Hi, everyone. Welcome to our April Business Bites. I hope everyone is having a fantastic Wednesday so far, and I'm very excited to see everyone joining us today for this fantastic panel discussion. For those of you who may not know, my name is Colin Sommerhauser, and I'm the head of HanaHaus in Palo Alto. If you're a returning audience member, this is probably your first time meeting me, as generally Brian Lay from our Newport Beach location has been doing this intro. But because he could not make it this afternoon, I'm here to fill in and welcome you all to this amazing session today. So as a quick background, Business Bites is a collaborative virtual series hosted by On Its Axis and HanaHaus. If you're not familiar, On Its Axis is an innovation consulting firm based in Southern California, and HanaHaus is a flexible co-working space and cafe with locations in both Palo Alto and Newport Beach. So unfortunately, our HanaHaus workspace has been closed during this pandemic, but we have continued to operate virtually and provide many insightful events, including Business Bites, every month. So if you are interested, you can follow both the HanaHaus and On Its Axis social media channels to kind of stay up to date with our latest and greatest events that are in the works and coming up. Now today, I do encourage all of you to use the chat feature at the bottom to engage and ask any questions throughout the session. And maybe as a quick starter, how about we have everyone go to the chat box right now and comment where you're tuning in from. It's always fun to see where our audience comes from, around the world, country, the state. So go ahead and do that now. And as a reminder, this session will be recorded and posted on the HanaHaus YouTube channel and sent out via email within the next week. We'll also provide a survey at the end of the session just to get some feedback to improve our future events. So please fill that out if you get a chance. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our amazing moderator, Kelly from On Its Axis, to welcome our panelists today.
Thank you so much, Colin, and thank you again to our panelists for joining us and volunteering their time as expert speakers on today's important topic, leading through change, lessons from leaders who thrived in 2020. No doubt, as we move through winter into spring throughout the US, many of us are ready for change and ready for a bit of optimism as we head into the summer months ahead. And I think what a perfect time for this important conversation about the role that leadership has played in helping our organizations and the people who run our companies thrive through this period of unexpected transition that no doubt touched every sector and every industry in the space. So really looking forward to an exciting and important conversation. Today, we're joined by several incredible panelists, and rather than speak for them, I'm looking forward to giving them the opportunity to share a bit about their backgrounds with us. So beginning with you, Stacy, will you please briefly introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about yourself and about the work that you do.
Yes, hi, Stacy Sherman. I am leading customer experience, which includes employee engagement at a global company, Schindler Elevator Corporation, and very focused, passionate about what I would call humanizing business, and have a lot of side passion, hobby projects when I'm not at my workplace, still around customer experience leadership. And very glad to be here today to talk about leadership and what others can do to really thrive.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Tom, if you could also share a bit about yourself and tell us a bit about the work you do.
Thanks. It was so inspiring to hear about what Stacy's up to. I'm Tom Rausch. I am located in Columbus, Ohio. I am brand new into a role as Director of Consulting at Barrett Value Center, where I am responsible for bringing the Barrett culture analytics and leadership tools to mostly large global organizations, which is what I've been doing for the past 10 years. They just asked me to come in-house and help them achieve the vision that we have for making the world more sustainable and closing. I'm personally dedicated to closing the leadership gap that exists between where we are now and where we need to be in order to achieve the UN sustainability goals and have a world where we can all thrive. And I do that in part for selfish reasons, because I'm a grandfather to 4 of the most fabulous grandchildren in the world.
Well, congratulations on many fronts, Tom. I'm really excited to hear about your personal change and how that switch from consulting to an in-house role may have impacted your perspective on this, but also from that personal motivation. And very excited to think about the role that sustainability or external factors have on leadership as we continue this discussion. That's really interesting. And Tracie, if you could share a bit about yourself and tell us a bit about the work that you do.
Sure. Thanks, Kelly. Hi, I'm Tracie Sponenberg. I'm the Chief People Officer for a company called the Granite Group. And the Granite Group is a wholesaler of plumbing, heating, cooling, water, propane, and energy supplies based in the Northeast. And we're also an essential business. So we have been operating every single day throughout the past year without missing a beat. So my job, I had a lot of added responsibilities over the past year as we had to keep people physically safe and psychologically safe navigating through a pandemic while they were serving our customers. So my role is pretty varied as a CPO. And on the side, I do a fair amount of speaking, and I co-organize Disrupt HR. I co-founded HR Rebooted, and I'm a founding member of CPO HQ as well.
Thanks so much, Tracie. Well, what an interesting background and combination of perspectives we'll have for today's conversation. And I'd love to come to you on this one first, Tom, and ask, what does leadership mean to you? And what role do you believe that it plays in organizational success?
I guess my clever answer would be it means everything and it means nothing. And I literally mean that because in many ways, our responses to the pandemic that Tracie was pointing to was all about leaders and how they treat and care for their people. And our own research at Baird Value Center shows this tremendous transformation that happened as leaders became more caring, more understanding, more willing to have people have work-life balance, at least the ones who've successfully navigated it. The reason I say in some ways it means nothing is because if we don't have the structures and support and systems that support good leadership, you can drop a good leader into a bad system and they will not thrive, because we have too many archaic systems and structures and processes that maybe served the industrial age that no longer serve us now. This also got tested as we went to work from home. So in one way, leadership does mean everything. And in another way, we also have to pay attention to the systems and processes we put into place that either support or don't support leaders and people.
Thanks. I think that's a great transition to Tracie, our Chief People Officer, and the role of leadership with people. So the same question for you, Tracie. What role does leadership play, and what role does it play in organizational success specifically?
Sure. And I agree with everything that Tom said. He's absolutely right there. And when you think of leadership as motivating people toward a common goal or a strategy or what have you, that can take a lot of different forms. And in our organization, our frontline managers, we tend to think of as our most, everybody's critical, but our most critical leaders, because they're leading a different organization. We have 50 of them, a different location, and those are the people that their people are going to day to day. So I think so often in organizations, and even in our organization, we miss that. We miss the mark sometimes, and we put someone in a role and say, you're the best salesperson, you're the best customer service person, here you go, now you have 10 people that you're responsible for, and we don't necessarily give them the tools. So for us, we talk often about our branch managers, those frontline leader roles, being our most important roles. And I think as organizations, we need to set everyone up for success. So get rid of all of the archaic things that Tom was talking about, and really give our managers the tools that they need to succeed.
Thank you so much. Stacy, as I turn to you, I'm going to ask the same question, but I think bringing in the external perspective with your expertise in customer experience, I'd love to hear a bit about the role that leadership plays in organizational success especially as it relates to the interaction with that customer or that customer engagement through change?
Yes. So first of all, for a great customer experience, it starts with great employee experiences. It starts from the inside, and customers see it and feel it. So what I mean by that, and great leadership means that, first of all, know your why. As a leader, know your why, and then bring that mission to an organization. For where I work, as an example, it's a traditional engineering company and over 100 years old. And when there's a mission to be more customer centric and really put into practice, not just talk, but really doing it right, then there's a movement. And so good leadership really starts that movement from the top down and the bottoms up.
Mm.
And so to me, a great leader is driving positive changes. It may not go very fast. In fact, that's the reality in a corporation. But the ability to lead a movement and get everybody internally to understand how they have a customer experience job, even the back office folks, that's how it happens. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's such a great perspective, the interplay between leadership having a responsibility for the internal employee experience, and then how that internal employee experience interacts and impacts the customer experience, which ultimately defines the organization's success. I think it's really, really important. I think as we think about leadership, one of the things that we have to consider is what's unique right now. And so, Tracie, as I come to you, I'd love to know from your perspective, what are the unique challenges that today's leaders face? You mentioned a few during your introduction about the role of emotionally supporting staff as an example. But what are these unique challenges, and what skills do leaders need for them to be optimally successful?
And I think Tom touched on this. We were forced into remote work, at least a lot of us. For my organization, some of our folks are remote, most of our folks are not and cannot be. But it really forced a shift that I think was happening all along, and we were forced to be really agile and adaptable, and things that we should have been doing anyway. We were also forced, and I keep using the word forced deliberately. It should have happened anyway, but it doesn't. Sometimes, unfortunately, it takes a crisis for us to realize what we should have been doing all along. We really had to look at our people and as whole people, and realize that there's no such thing as work-life balance. Work and life are integrated, and it's life, and work is a part of life. And so we really needed to tend to our people's not only physical health, but emotional health and well-being, and things like financial health. We saw where companies were laying off or doing furloughs, and other companies had spouses who were losing positions, or partners who were losing positions. And so we were deeply involved in the personal lives of our people, more than we ever had been. So I think something that's critical, emotional intelligence, certainly emotional intelligence and vulnerability. And that's something we've been talking about a lot. It's something that I've had to work really hard to embrace myself, and something that as leaders we can really model to make sure that our leaders are doing the same, and encouraging that, not only encouraging that, but really embracing that within their own people.
Thank you so much. Stacy, coming to you, curious, working within an enterprise organization that's 100 years old, are there unique challenges today in that organization that it were unplanned, and what skills are the same or different from that kind of a startup environment?
Yeah, and it's way over 100. It's really incredible, the journey of where the company has gone. But in terms of the challenges, actually the opportunities from everybody working remotely in different countries, I am seeing an incredible movement in communication. People are communicating more intentionally, not only with each other in the company, using videos more than ever before, but also with customers. Because we can't get to customers, especially the front line during COVID, there has been more intention and focus on picking up the phone, telling customers, I haven't forgotten about you, even when there isn't an answer of specifically when there's going to be a delivery or a repair, but still that conscious communication is really the blessing out of a bad situation. And I think that it's going to continue because communication really does factor into experiences. So no matter time zones is a challenge, but we overcome it by communicating effectively.
Great, great. And Tom, coming to you, what unique challenges do you see in addition to the ones that Tracie and Stacy have shared? Are there any other unique challenges today's leaders face, and any skills that you see as essential for leaders to possess?
First of all, I agree with both what Tracie and Stacy had to say, and I think I would even build upon it. The biggest external factor is this crazy VUCA world we live in, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so everyone, leaders and people, are facing, and COVID was just the universal human experience of all this craziness. So leaders are facing that unprecedented level of pressure, personal, competitive, everything out there. So that's huge. And as it was, I think Stacy who alluded to it earlier, leaders are being asked to lead like transformations in their organization, right? It's like, it's not just managing people or being nice to people anymore. It's like, okay, we need to have this huge change initiative, and you need to be the exemplar leader of change. And you're going to have to learn to coach and develop your people and learn a whole new way of managing, because that's how we're leading in the future. And oh, by the way, do it with humility, because that is, the newest hallmark, and I truly believe it is, humble leadership and seeking perspective and all that. But all of that points to the 10x disruption that's happening in our real world and our competitive world and how we operate in business. But it also is like a 10x challenge to develop as human beings who can both connect at the human level and manage incredibly complex sets of circumstances that are occurring.
I think that there were so many nuggets that each of you shared, right? The importance and value of emotional intelligence, the importance and value of creating equity and creating a channel of communication in a lens for communication that allows for better collaboration and doesn't privilege one type over another. I'm curious, as we think about this, we think about the VOCA. I love that acronym. I'll be using it now moving forward. Thank you for that. But as we think about this shift that we're going through from the knowledge age to the innovation age, and this exponential pace of change that is occurring, do we have examples of leaders who are doing it well that we can lean on and that we can start to maybe pull some of nuggets out of their experience and learn? Because as each of you sort of mentioned, leaders are being asked to do this in the moment, and they're being asked to respond in the moment. And I think if we can see examples of other leaders that are doing it well, it becomes easier to start to build the framework and to adopt that. And so, Tom, coming back to you first this time, can you share an example of a leader or an organization that you believe demonstrates the attributes that you described as successful in leadership?
Yeah, one of my favorite stories of leadership is a guy named Bob Chapman, and he heads a company called Barry Waymiller, which was a small. His dad, I think his grandfather, started as a bottle cap machinery making system in St. Louis. And since his transformation as a leader, he's grown that company he's done something like 80 successful acquisitions and made a small struggling family business into a billion-dollar global organization. And he does it by, he wrote a book, or he co-wrote a book that was published by Conscious Capitalism called Everybody's Development Matters. And it's so beautiful because it's simply based on care about people. They're like, how do you merge all these cultures? Well, we care about people. Well, they don't believe you at first, do they? No, of course they don't believe us. What do? Well, we just keep caring about them. But care about people combined with be transparent, show them the bottom line, build in accountability by showing them how they contribute to success, and then recognize those people and then train the heck out of them. And they've established a whole huge training unit to train all their people's family and how to communicate better, how to deal with stress. They're just the most wonderful organization who's figured out some of the basics is measure stuff and make it transparent and really care about people. That'll carry you a long, long way.
Those are two very important pillars. And as I process that, I'm going to come over to you, Tracie, and ask you to weigh in on the same topic. Can you share an example of a leader or an organization that demonstrates successful leadership?
Sure, I can think of I'm sure we all know some large ones that we've read in the media, but one that your audience may not have heard of or may have is VaynerMedia, and Gary Vee brought in Claude Silver as the world's first chief heart officer. They're so people-centric that they are completely focused on the whole person and completely focused on love and supporting their people, which I think is really, really cool. And I think we're going to see a lot more of. And we've learned a lot over the past year. And we've learned if we don't love our people, then what the hell are we doing with our businesses, right? And I'm also going to give the example of my own CEO, who I've learned a ton from. So like the example Tom mentioned, this is a family-owned business, third generation. We've gone through not quite that amount of acquisitions, but a number of acquisitions over the years. And one of the really cool things about him is, and I've never experienced this before, he's managed, as we grow bigger and bigger, to keep the organization small, to keep it where everybody is a name, not a number. He goes to all of our locations, all 50 of them, regularly. Everyone knows him. He knows everybody. That's going to be harder and harder as we move forward. And we established from the very beginning of COVID communications, we pushed out videos with the CEO every single day. We had lots of two-way communications. We gave out his cell phone number, my cell phone number. We paid everyone for any time off they needed, anything COVID related, whether they had a sniffle or actually had COVID, at 100%. And we continue to do that. And we just led with the right thing to do, threw kind of the guidebook out the window and led with the right thing to do. And we there's no evidence that we'll stop that, right? So we'll continue to do that. So I've really learned a lot about how to lead from him.
I love that example. And Stacy, coming up to you, will you please share an example?
Yes, I have two people, one I know personally and one I don't. The person I know personally is my mother. And the reason is because she is truly a change agent. As one of the first women on the American Stock Exchange on Wall Street back in the day. And there were really no women there. So, and I remember visiting the floor of the exchange and looking around and seeing all these men, and there's my mom, petite mom, and doing all the trades and hand signals and men picking her up. And it was really a unique time, but I didn't realize then how much she was thriving as a minority. Didn't really get it then. So I just say her because of the willpower and the confidence to be able to thrive in situations. And then secondly, the person I don't know and I wish I knew is Oprah Winfrey, because for so many reasons, but I'll narrow it down to one. She has a show called, it's on Apple, and it's about uncomfortable conversations. And if you haven't seen it, please watch it. But the reason why I highlight it is because from her stories and interviews with people, and they're very uncomfortable conversations about diversity, inclusion, and more, I have learned how to be a leader that it's okay to have uncomfortable conversations, take the elephant out of the room and keep it real. And I see the value of doing that. So there's my answer.
Well, thank you. And thank you to each of our speakers. If you are listening to today's session from home, watching this on YouTube in the future, or if you're in our audience and have access to chat right now, we'd love to hear the leaders who've motivated you. But if you are watching the recording of this after the fact, I'd encourage you to follow each of today's speakers as leaders who I believe also demonstrate successful leadership. They're volunteering their time to share their knowledge because they care about people, because they practice these skills and attributes. So thank you to each of you. And if you are listening from home, definitely follow them. That said, Stacy, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to ask you, will you please share with our audience the best leadership advice you've received, or a leadership story you've heard that you think that would benefit our audience to listen in on?
Yes. So I'm actually saying what I just tell my young adult, I can't even call them kids, college kids. And that is about showing up, really listening. You have 2 ears, 1 mouth, use it appropriately, and speaking with confidence. And the best book that I've read, it's not a business book, but boy, does it relate to leadership and showing up really well as your best self. And it's called The 4 Agreements. And it's about don't make assumptions, don't take anything personally, and be impeccable with your words, how important that is. One of those is should. Don't should on yourself, don't should on others, and always do your best. And there's so much meaning to all of those agreements, but at least it'll give you a sneak peek of what it's about. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. I am not on video today, but I was nodding along as I saw the other speakers nodding along with that sage advice. A wonderful book and wonderful models to live by. Tom, I'll hand it over to you. I'm looking forward to learning the best leadership advice you've received.
Well, you probably saw my big grin and head shaking when Stacy mentioned The 4 Agreements. That's one of my all-time favorite books. And particularly, I took that one to heart because I was a bit of a gossip and not holding my tongue correctly. And when I stopped gossiping, I lost so much pain went out of my life. I mean, there are some really deep truths in that book, 4 Agreements. So definitely for a young leader, take those on. My other favorite leadership book is Leadership and Self-Deception. And I love that book by the Arbinger Institute. If you're new to leadership, but it works at all levels, it's all about the assumptions and boxes we put people into. And as soon as we put people into a box, we will never be able to lead them because we will never be able to really see them as the human they truly are. So those are my 2 favorite leadership books. And my advice about leadership is something I had to take myself. And recently, 2 years ago, I recommitted to every day, every moment learning. And it can become so easy to get stagnant or think you made it. But what I've realized is that we all have a learning edge. And I'm happy to say, as an old dog, I'm still learning new tricks, and that it is always possible if you simply hold the intention and you make your practices and what you're trying to learn small enough. You can even get to the point where you start to see your own biases and your own shadows, and you can start to really develop the nuances of yourself as a human being if you are constantly focused on it. And it's not that hard and doesn't take up that much headspace. It's kind of learning how to learn again and kind of learn like a baby learns. You know, when the baby falls down, it gets back up and keeps having fun trying. And I think that kind of attitude towards life is really, really critical. The best leaders I've ever seen and the best leaders I've known just are always learning.
I love that transition. Here at On Its Axis, we say it's a safe to try work environment. It's one of the pillars of innovation, is that you create a brave space where it becomes safe to try. And so I love that idea of always learning. As I turn it over to you, Tracie, looking forward to hearing your share on what the best leadership advice you've received or leadership story you've heard or observed would be.
Sure. So, and I love these, and I'm nodding along vigorously as well. And so early in my career, I was very stuck in my ways, very stuck in my ways. I came of age in the age of personnel as we were transitioning into human resources. And now we've kind of moved toward people. And my evolution was slow and painful. But very early in my career, I thought my way was the right way. There was only one way to do things, that everything was compliance driven. And I worked for, my boss was terrific and she was a great mentor toward me. And I worked with a person who came onto the team. I worked on a large team who was a renegade and a rebel and did not do things the way they should be done, got the end result, but went around the process and the procedure. And I was so incensed by that, I could barely stand coming into work. And my manager knew that. And I talked to her about that. And what she did was assign me to work for him. And I left for a while. I cried. I was really upset. And then what I came to realize is that we're better. We're better by working with, working for, and working alongside people who are different than us. And I came to really respect and embrace differences and differences of opinion. It took me a long time to really put that into practice, but that was one of my biggest leadership lessons ever. And as far as what to follow, I am a big fan of Simon Sinek. And I tend to send people, when I send things out, I send a lot of videos out because that for our leadership team, those tend to be easier to consume and they tend to be really short. And there's also a ton of people I follow on LinkedIn and I learn a lot from them. And I have a whole side group called the HR Rebels, too, that I follow really closely. And I love their advice. Barbie Winterbottom and Kayla Moncayo. And for very different reasons, but they've taught me more in the last year than I've learned in the past several years. And like Tom, I'm learning every single day. I'm also an old dog and continuing to try to learn.
Thank you so much, Tracie. Thank you to everybody. I think that each of you who've come to Business Bites today clearly embrace an attitude of learning and openness to seeking advice and information. We know how many competing demands for time there are. And so thank you for spending time with us. We'd love to turn it over to you and give you the ability to ask our speakers a question about leadership or a question about their experience in general. So to the audience, feel free to put your questions in the chat or raise your hand using the Zoom hand raise feature. And as you're typing it in, I will say that I had received a direct message request as well about leadership in general. So we talked very positively about leadership, but are there any kind of old leadership habits that should be disposed of? So this is the question. So there are these positive attributes of what leaders should do and leadership success, but are there any leadership habits that need to go away? And Tom, I see you nodding, so I'll come to you first with that one.
Yeah, I think the biggest leadership habit that needs to be put aside and that I work with my leaders to put aside is to stop solving your people's problems. Instead, solve your people. In other words, develop your people to solve their own problems. We have this thing where we're raised in leadership and management to think we need to be the person with the answers. That is not true. If you're a good leader, you're the dumbest person in the room, not the smartest person in the room, because you've hired smarter people than you and you trust them to develop. So stop trying to control, stop trying to overmanage, stop trying to solve and be the repository of everything, and start developing your people and trusting them. So it's like the opposite skill.
That's great.
And
does anybody?
I want to jump on what Tom said about trust a couple of times. Sorry to interrupt, Kelly, but that that's something that's super critical that I still see occasionally, and I see externally a lot, that managers who don't lead with trust, that develop these policies because this one person won't do this, or the butts and seats syndrome, and I don't know what you're doing unless I can see you, so I need to have you in the office so I can see you. Of course, you don't know if they're actually working in the office either, but not leading with trust, and having that inherent skepticism that people are trying to pull something over on you, I see is still a leadership problem, not everywhere, but something that we really need to move on from.
Thank you. Stacy?
Yeah, so something that I'm becoming much more aware of, and truly understanding the value of, is to stop creating sameness. In other words, rather than call, let's all have a holiday celebration, let's actually get out the calendar and know what is everybody's special days that's meaningful to them, religious and non-religious. And let's get to know what the others are celebrating, other cultures. There's beauty in that. And there's also beauty in saying, I don't know about your holiday. Teach me. I'd love to learn. So recognizing the unique differences and actually taking time to get to know what it's about.
Wonderful perspective. Now we're getting a number of questions coming in, so I'll start just in order. How can an organization change the way an organization operates if the individuals that are, let's say on the front line, it says on the bottom, say the change doesn't work and don't follow the new management orders? So how can an organization change the way it operates if the frontline employees don't change, say that it won't work or disagree with the changes?
So I can contribute. So to me, when there's a will, there's always a way. So what that means is get to the front line, have those individual conversations. I call it the voice of the employee. Get to know, what are they resistant of? What's in the way? What's their fear? And when you start to peel the onion back, you then really can address each individual's concerns of the mission. And when you do that, they feel cared for, they feel more empowered, and the magic happens. So it's not a cookie cutter approach.
Yeah,
Right.
I agree with Stacy. And the person asking, it's either perceived that these are orders or they're given as orders, which would show some sort of concern. At least that would be concerning to me. And that if you open those lines of communication and you look at accomplishing things together and get people involved, you're much more likely to have success.
Yeah, and that really, that's a great point, Tracy and Stacy, and that really points to the next question of, are we empowering our employees and letting them contribute? So if they feel part of the change, right? If their opinions and if hey, you run up against resistance, and that's when you go start seeking buy-in. Great, you did it a little late, but now is your opportunity to do it. So just listening to them and letting them, creating opportunities for them to have as much autonomy as possible. Every human being wants autonomy. It's one of our basic needs. And the truth is, we need everybody's best thinking and best contribution on the table. And the way to do that is to involve and empower them. And empowerment is also like somebody great once said, for the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast, we should also have a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast. Empowerment and accountability go hand in hand. So it's like when you empower people, you also need to hold them accountable. And that's the good kind of accountability that people want to be held accountable for. Everybody's proud of their success and their effort if they've been empowered to try and achieve it and do that. So that's the key there, I think.
And one more thing to what Tom said, which is so fundamental to any organization's success, is to break the silos. So oftentimes people say, well, that's HR's job. And others say, well, that's someone else's job. And then what happens is no one does it. And so that's where the collaboration, where I say, at least where I am, like everyone has a customer experience job, and here's how you contribute to that. So nobody else is waiting for somebody else to take the action.
Thank you. And Tracie, coming to you with this question that we're answering right now, which is about empowerment. Do you have any specific tips for how to empower employees, aside from kind of inter-team communication and breaking the silos? I think is a wonderful concept, but anything tangible that a leader can do to create that feeling of empowerment for employees?
You want to create a sense of trust and psychological safety. And that starts with actually, and this may seem intuitive to some of us, but it's not to everybody, starts with actually talking to people, getting to know people, getting to know them as more than just your employee, right? So if you create that sense of trust, you create that sense of belonging, they're more likely to feel a part of something, and certainly sharing as much as you possibly can about the business and making sure that you're connecting what they do. And every single person in your company, every single person has an impact on the business. So connect what they do into the business results, and I think they're more likely to feel connected to the business that way.
Thank you. Alec asked us to share about some tough leadership decisions that you've witnessed or had to make and the impact of those decisions. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the decision-making process as a leader about those tough decisions. So you can share a specific example of a tough leadership decision, or you can talk a little bit about sort of the leadership mindset when making a difficult decision, and how that leadership mindset might sort of help with this organizational empowerment and sense of trust in the community. Do any of you want to chime in on that? It's a big one.
Yeah, I'll take it from two quick angles. One is, the ones that are personally toughest for me is when you have to have a candid conversation with somebody about how their skill set, and despite all of our best efforts, they're just not right for the role. And if especially if you don't have another role for them in the organization, and the kindest thing to do is to encourage them and help them find a way out of the organization into something that's a better fit for them. That's always personally, a difficult conversation to have. And I think it goes back to, you have those candid conversations because of your values. You know that is truly the kind thing to do, to be candid, rather than not. And I would say the same thing, the Bob Chapman, Barry Waymiller story I shared earlier. I know when they navigated the last big recession in 2008, 2009, they didn't lay off a single person. Now, some people left and they gave them packages because they wanted to leave, and other people took like extended leave and says, I've always been wanting to travel around the world. I can give up my salary for a year. And every employee agreed and took a vote on it and agreed to like a 20% cut in total payroll rather than lose people in their department. So when you make big, tough decisions, when it's based on your values, it always comes out better, even if it is hard and personally painful. It always is better if you're doing it tied with your deeply held values.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else want to share on that one? We have several more questions, so it's okay for us to move to another.
Oh no, I was gonna say, I agree with Tom, and the toughest thing you can do is, I think, as a leader, is separate someone from your company. But if you do keep that, and I've had to do that a lot over the years, and if you do keep the values in mind, I've had people thank me who I terminated, right? Because you keep the values in mind, and you also keep the human being in mind. And if they're not doing well, they can't be happy. And as long as you're doing the things as an organization, that everything that you can to get them to that point, that makes it easier. Still real darn hard, but it makes it a little bit easier.
Great. These are wonderful questions that are coming in from everybody. I'm trying to consolidate, but one theme that I'm reading is that people are looking for real life examples about leadership lessons and a challenging moment or situation, lessons learned. I think that so much of what we sometimes see in leadership books is this theoretical, and the day-to-day experience of leadership as it's happening doesn't necessarily have that same obvious impact of that applied experience in your workforce. So do any of you have an example of a challenging moment or situation that you've observed as a leader, and any lessons learned from that? I'm seeing some nods. So Stacy, I'll come to you.
Okay. Yes. During this time where we've been all dealing, I would say, with the pandemic, there's a lot of emotion every day. You really don't know what to expect every day. Everybody's situations and home life, and it differs. And so I faced situations, this job, past jobs, where someone will cry about a situation that they're facing, and there could be a culmination of different things that are impacting their unhappiness. And so I've learned the art of listening and really hearing, what does that person need? Does that person need me to solve something, or just actually the opposite? Do they need a quote timeout? Do they need to be left alone so that they can recover from what they're going through? And I found that by really listening to that, and in many cases, it's kind of leave them alone for a little bit. It turns into where the dissatisfaction, and sometimes it's negativity can become contagious. But if you really have the heart to heart and uncomfortable conversations, and they feel safe to share, then they come out better than before. And so that's my advice, is listen and then know how to react. And sometimes it's to do nothing.
It's wonderful. I think a theme I've heard in today's conversation is about bringing humanity into leadership, listening and caring and doing the right thing, and recognizing that as leaders, we don't always have the right answer. As leaders, sometimes the answer is a consensus answer, and sometimes it's about holding the line of company values, but embracing the team answers. But what happens in this next question when the leadership style is command and control? When the leadership structure in an organization is a kind of top-down leadership, do what I say approach. How do you help an organization like that through transformation where there's an empathetic leadership if you're a mid-level leader?
Run.
You run away, or
You leave.
You kill
That's what I
all.
was gonna say.
You kill all of the leaders. No, it's, that actually is eventually they're going to kill themselves, because they're not going to survive long. But in the meantime, you can point to them there's tons of information out there now about how companies with better cultures and participative management and all of this stuff are much better run. But again, if you have a command and control, I was just working with an organization who was a bunch of ex-Navy guys, and they had a lot of hard time getting rid of the Navy command and control. That was a natural part of their style. But yeah, it's very difficult if somebody doesn't want to change. You can lead a horse to water, but if they don't want to change, they're not going to drink. But that doesn't mean you can't leave, and it also doesn't mean that you can't be dropping articles on their desks showing how a different way of leading would be so much better.
Particularly if it pertains to finance, if you can link it to money, that organizations that lead in a heart-centered way or that lead with empathy make more money. And I know that there's some research out there, but that may work, but otherwise it's maybe a lost cause.
Yeah, and I think that we all need to remember that we all have choices. I wake up every day and say, how do I want to experience the day? And we have choices of where we spend our time and who's in our tribe. And so I encourage everybody to really be intentional with that because it makes a difference, including where you work.
Mhm.
I think such a powerful conversation. I know there are several more questions that came in, but I will share sort of generic answer as a moderator to this, and then give each of you an opportunity to share a parting thought before we leave today. The questions are about the styles of change management. Specifically, has anybody used the Cotter's 8-step change model, and how long does change management take? And I'd say that it's as diverse as the diversity of the companies and the people who work within companies. It depends so much on change, and change isn't fixed by its very definition. Change doesn't have a terminating endpoint. It will continue to evolve, just as we as people and as leaders continue to evolve. And there are many models. The 8-step model is one framework. There are many proven frameworks that help some organizations and some types of change, but it really is about finding the right solutions for your team and finding the right solutions for yourselves. And that's what I've heard from all of you today. With that, starting with you, Tracie, I'll ask for any final words for our audience as we wrap up today's session.
So, and this is great, and thank you for having me here. And it's been great to listen and learn from Tom and Stacy as well. But what I would leave the audience with is advice I give often. And we don't do our jobs in a vacuum, or ideally we don't. We have our teammates, certainly, and we have our companies. But the single best piece of advice I can give is build your network, and build your network with people who are different than you in all different kinds of industries, different kinds of jobs, different genders, different races, people that you can learn from, and people who don't look, learn, think, or love like you, like my friend Kayla says. And that way you have a really great group of people that you can lean on when you're going through things like this. So I'm normally in a meeting this time with my friends from all over the world, and we just share stories and learn from each other every Wednesday. And I want that for everybody, right? So it makes us better leaders, and it makes us better humans.
Wonderful. Tom.
I love what Tracie just said about looking at diverse, getting together with diverse people is a great piece of advice. I want to address because I do so much culture change and transformation. I just put a link in about the research that Barrett did around COVID, right at the height of COVID, April, May, right at the height of uncertainty last year. And it was so fascinating because transformation that if you were consciously trying to make it, that would normally take 5 to 7 years of consistent work happened overnight because it had to. And this, gets to what Tracie was saying about, we had to make these changes. Law firms who never got their lawyers to use email or video conferencing are suddenly emailing and video conferencing. So it seems to take a long time, but it doesn't have to take a long time. And I think the key to making that change happen is to embrace these new mindsets of openness, of empowerment, of engagement, of trust, of compassion, of humility, right? So whatever label you put on this new style of leadership and management, that's to me where it begins, at least what we can personally do. And then as you become skilled in, there's all kinds of tools out there that can help you, do transformation if you're lucky enough to have that power in the organization to wield that kind of transformation. And I want to thank you guys for listening today and for having us and for inviting us. And this has just been a lot of fun for me.
Thanks so much, Tom. Stacy.
Yes. So my recommendation is, I'm also putting in the chat, my Forbes article around crawl, walk, run, your way to success. And change takes a really long time. The bigger the company, the longer it might take, but don't give up and have the mindset of crawl, walk, run. Crawl, just start doing it. Do it wrong quickly, learn, pilot, and then start to walk from it. And then eventually you'll run and scale. And so that's the mindset I carry and I implement wherever I go. And so I hope people will read the article I shared in the chat because it works. So thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. And Colin, handing it over to you to wrap us up today.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Kelly. And thank you again to all of our panelists for taking the time out of your day to speak with our audience about leading through change. I know this was a super insightful conversation. I think based on the engagement and the questions we had, I think that everyone found it incredibly valuable. And so I will be dropping the feedback survey in the chat box right now. So if you do have a chance to fill it out right now, it's very quick, be super helpful. So yeah, it's in the chat now. And our next Business Bites will be coming up in May. So be on the lookout for the registration link in our follow-up email, along with the replay link to this session. And with that, have a great rest of your Wednesday. And I look forward to seeing you all next month. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.